High above the city of Potosi, in the heart of the Bolivian Andes, rises a mountain that has claimed more lives than any battlefield or plague in history. Cerro Rico, the so-called Rich Mountain, hides a deadly secret. Within its glittering silver veins lie the remnants of millions of souls who were sacrificed to the unyielding pursuit of wealth. It began in the 1540s, when Spanish conquistadors arrived, drawn not by the beauty of the Andes or the richness of its cultures, but by whispers of silver hidden deep within the mountain. The small indigenous settlement at its base quickly transformed into a sprawling city of labor and oppression. Men, women, and even children were pressed into work through the brutal meter system, a colonial adaptation of ancient Incan labor drafts designed to fuel the empire's greed. Descending into the tunnels, workers faced air so thick with dust that breathing became a battle, narrow corridors that forced men to crawl, and ceilings so unstable that rockfalls could end a life instantly. Mercury, used to extract silver from ore, coated their hands, skin, and lungs, poisoning them slowly but relentlessly. Families above ground watched as loved ones disappeared into the mountain, often never to return, their fates sealed in darkness. Over time, the city above grew wealthy. Grand churches rose from silver, and the empire prospered, while below, human suffering became invisible, normalized, and almost inevitable. The mountain's hunger was insatiable. No amount of labor or life could sate it. Miners whispered stories of the mountain as a living entity, absorbing ambition, fear, and blood alike, feeding on those who dared enter. And yet, despite the obvious danger, people continued to arrive, driven by the lure of silver, the hope of fortune, or the coercion of imperial demand. Each day that men labored, each ounce of silver extracted, became a testament to both human ambition and the price of greed. Cerro Rico was not merely a source of wealth, it was a predator, patient and eternal, swallowing generations in silence. Before we descend further into the mountain's dark history, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. By the early 1600s, Potosi had grown into a city of stark contrasts. Above ground, silver glittered in churches, plazas, and merchant houses. Horse-drawn carriages navigated cobbled streets lined with opulent mansions, and festivals celebrated wealth that had been extracted with relentless human sacrifice. Below the surface, the tunnels of Cerro Rico expanded into a labyrinth of darkness, suffocating dust, and deadly hazards. Indigenous laborers and African slaves labored shoulder to shoulder, carrying baskets of ore that weighed far more than their bodies could safely endure. The mountain was alive with danger, ceilings that could collapse at any moment, unstable floors, hidden pockets of toxic gas, and corridors that twisted so deeply into the Andes that a single wrong turn could mean certain death. Mercury poisoning became widespread, leaving miners permanently scarred, coughing blood, and blinded by its toxic fumes. Each miner understood the mountain demanded more than strength. It required endurance, cunning, and an almost supernatural patience. Rumors circulated that Cerro Rico could sense greed, punishing those who sought fortune recklessly, while sparing those who respected the rock's wrath. Families waited above in helpless anxiety, watching sons, fathers, and brothers descend with tools and hope, uncertain whether they would return alive. For the empire, however, human life was expendable. Silver flowed relentlessly to Europe, fueling commerce, armies, and the crown's insatiable ambitions, while the mountain's toll remained invisible to all who dwelled above. Whippings, mutilations, and executions were common for those who failed their quotas or disobeyed orders, ensuring fear remained as constant as the labor itself. Even as miners formed secret alliances, sharing knowledge of safe routes and air pockets, the mountain claimed lives with cruel impartiality. The juxtaposition of wealth above and death below became the defining paradox of Potosi. Every coin minted carried the weight of invisible suffering, and every tunnel entrance became a doorway into a world where ambition and mortality were inseparable. The mountain's hunger was patient, its appetite silent yet absolute, and every day it continued to swallow lives as payment for its silver, unyielding and eternal. By the mid-1700s, the scale of human suffering within Cerro Rico had reached staggering proportions. Entire generations of indigenous families were drawn into the tunnels, with fathers, sons, and even children descending daily into darkness, unaware if they would see sunlight again. Miners often began work as early as dawn and continued for 12, 14, or even 16 hours without rest. The constant inhalation of dust and mercury slowly consumed their bodies, leaving lungs blackened and vision dimmed. Collapses were an ever-present threat. A sudden crack in the ceiling, a misstep on a narrow ledge, or a miscalculated load of ore could bury a man instantly. Those who survived carried permanent scars, broken limbs, chronic pain, and the psychological torment of witnessing friends vanish into the rock. Outside, Potosi prospered. Its wealth seemed endless, with grand churches rising from silver and lavish mansions lining the streets. Meanwhile, miners' families struggled above, often starving or succumbing to disease, their grief ignored by the empire that profited from their sacrifice. Rumors spread of men who entered the tunnels with companions but emerged alone, haunted by echoes of screams that would never fade. Superstition flourished underground, with miners performing rituals and leaving offerings in narrow crevices, desperate to appease the mountain they believed to be alive, sentient, and endlessly hungry. Even as Europe's demand for silver grew, miners labored under ever-tightening quotas, their mortality a mere statistic in a ledger of imperial greed. Despite the oppressive conditions, hope flickered in whispered stories of survival, of hidden air pockets and secret shortcuts learned from older miners. But the mountain's appetite was insatiable. Every ounce of silver extracted seemed to call for another life in return. Cerro Rico had become a predator, patient and eternal, feeding on ambition, fear, and desperation alike. Every day the mountain swallowed men whole, leaving a trail of invisible graves beneath the city's glittering surface, a silent testament to the cost of human ambition when confronted with relentless greed. As the 18th century wore on, Cerro Rico's appetite for human life showed no sign of slowing. The tunnels carved deep into the Andes expanded into ever more dangerous labyrinths, their ceilings unstable, corridors twisting, and air thick with dust and toxic mercury fumes. Miners worked in teams, yet no one was truly safe. Rockfalls could collapse an entire shaft in an instant, leaving men buried alive and their screams swallowed by the mountain. Children were not spared. Boys and girls as young as 8 carried loads too heavy for their bodies, their small hands blistered and lungs weak. Disease spread rapidly underground, compounded by malnutrition and exhaustion. Even seasoned miners, who knew the rock and its treacherous patterns, could be claimed in a single misstep. Above ground, Potosi glittered with wealth. Its churches gleamed with silver altars, merchant families flaunted riches, and festivals celebrated a prosperity built upon blood, sweat, and death. The contrast was jarring, opulence above, suffering below. The mountain demanded obedience and relentless labor, and those who faltered faced brutal punishment, lashings, imprisonment, or death. Yet men continued to arrive, drawn by the illusions of fortune and the coercive demands of colonial authority. The legend of Cerro Rico grew, whispers spreading among miners that the mountain was alive, sentient, and aware of human greed. Rituals and offerings became common, small acts of desperation to appease the unyielding force they had no hope of controlling. Even as silver flowed to Europe, enriching the empire and fueling distant wars, the human cost remained invisible, quantified only in whispered stories and the hollowed bodies of survivors. Every day, Cerro Rico claimed new victims, its hunger as patient and eternal as the mountains themselves. Each ton of silver extracted carried the weight of life and death intertwined, a chilling reminder that in pursuit of wealth, humanity often becomes expendable. The mountain's shadow loomed over Potosi and its people, an ever-present specter that would continue to demand lives long after the empire had moved on. As the 18th century progressed, the veins of Cerro Rico grew ever more treacherous, and with them the human cost. Miners descended daily into corridors that twisted deep into the Andes, where the air was thin and poisonous, and ceilings threatened collapse at every step. Every basket of silver ore carried upward was purchased with a life or the promise of one yet to come. Mercury exposure had become routine, slowly crippling the lungs, blinding the eyes and deforming the hands of those who survived the tunnel's crushing weight. Miners learned from experience and tradition, passing down whispered knowledge of weak rock, hidden air pockets, and safer paths. Yet even skill could not fully shield them. A misjudged step or an unexpected cave-in could turn survival into tragedy. Families above ground watched in despair, powerless to intervene as fathers, brothers, and sons disappeared into the mountain's dark veins. Superstition thrived in the shadows, with miners leaving offerings of food, coins, or prayer tokens in the tunnels, hoping to appease the malevolent force that seemed to inhabit the rock itself, above ground. The city continued its celebrations of silver wealth, festivals, churches, and grand houses, masking the suffering that had made them possible. The divide between the lives of those who profited from the mountain and those who fed it was stark, almost incomprehensible. Punishment for failing quotas or attempting to escape labor was swift and brutal. Whippings, imprisonment, and death ensured compliance, a constant reminder of the empire's indifference to human life. The mountain seemed to reward only perseverance and submission, while greed or desperation was often met with immediate consequence. As miners continued to labor day after day, the mountain silently accumulated the weight of countless lives, its appetite unrelenting, indifferent, and patient. Every ounce of silver extracted was a testament to the endurance, suffering, and mortality of the men who had entered and not returned. And yet, despite the obvious danger and the mountain's relentless toll, new workers kept arriving, drawn by the promise of wealth, the coercion of imperial mandate, or the hope that they might survive where millions had failed. Cerro Rico had become both a source of fortune and a predator, eternal in its hunger and indifferent to all that lay above its surface. By the mid-1700s, the relentless demands of Cerro Rico had transformed both the landscape and the people who labored within it. Miners who had survived decades underground bore the marks of the mountain's cruelty. Lungs blackened from dust, hands scarred and deformed by mercury, eyes dulled from darkness and disease. Entire families were ensnared in its grasp, generations born into a life of labor and death beneath the towering peak. The tunnel stretched farther than most could imagine, twisting like a living organism, breathing only the thin, poisonous air and consuming anyone who misstepped. Knowledge became survival. Seasoned miners taught the young which veins were safe, which corridors could collapse without warning, and how to read the subtle shifts in rock that warned of imminent danger. Yet experience was never a guarantee of life. Collapses were sudden, unpredictable, and often fatal, leaving survivors haunted by the echoes of friends lost and the weight of knowing they could be next. Superstition and ritual became part of daily life. Small offerings of food, coins, or prayer notes were left in hidden crevices, attempts to placate the mountain's perceived hunger for human life. Above ground, Potosi glittered with wealth, a city oblivious to the countless deaths that had built its prosperity. Silver continued to flow to the Spanish crown, enriching empires and funding wars, while below the mountain claimed its toll with merciless consistency. Even rebellion or complaint from the laborers was futile. Punishment for disobedience was immediate and severe. The mountain did not distinguish between the innocent and the guilty. Its hunger was indiscriminate. Yet miners continued to descend, driven by hope, obligation, and the coercive demands of colonial rule. Each day in the tunnels was a test of endurance, courage, and cunning, with death lurking silently in every shadow. Every ounce of silver that emerged above ground was the accumulated cost of exhaustion, disease, injury, and lost lives. Cerro Rico had become more than a mountain. It had become a predator, an eternal force that fed on ambition, desperation, and human suffering alike. Its appetite was patient, unforgiving, and perpetual, reminding all who gazed upon it that wealth extracted from the earth came at a price measured in human life. By the late 1700s, the scale of labor and loss within Cerro Rico had become almost unimaginable. Miners moved like shadows through the labyrinthine tunnels, their bodies bent under the weight of baskets overflowing with silver ore, their lungs filled with dust and toxic fumes. Children as young as 8 or 10 were pressed into service, carrying loads far beyond their strength, their small hands blistered and their breathing shallow. Teenagers, adults, and elders alike labored relentlessly, often side by side with enslaved Africans brought from distant lands. Death was a constant companion, whether through collapsing ceilings, falling rocks, or the insidious poison of mercury that coated their hands, skin, and lungs. Every ounce of silver that emerged above ground was purchased with the cost of life, pain, and shattered families. Above, Potosi dazzled with opulence. Grand churches glistened with silver altars, plazas buzzed with commerce, and merchants flaunted wealth amassed at the expense of invisible suffering. Yet beneath this grandeur, the mountain demanded its toll, exacting obedience and endurance from all who dared enter. Whippings, brutal punishments, and executions were commonplace for those who failed to meet their quotas, and even skill could not guarantee survival. Miners developed rituals and traditions to cope with fear, leaving offerings in hidden niches, chanting prayers, and whispering protective incantations to the mountain. Legends grew of miners who entered in groups, but emerged alone, hollow-eyed and silent, carrying only the memories of friends lost forever to the dark. Despite the evident danger, men continued to arrive, drawn by the promise of silver, the illusions of fortune, and the coercion of imperial authority. The mountain had become a living predator, feeding on human ambition, fear, and desperation, patient and unyielding in its appetite. Each day brought new victims, each ton of silver carried the weight of countless lives, and every corridor whispered the stories of those who had vanished. Puerto Rico had evolved from a mere source of wealth into a grim arbiter of life and death, an eternal reminder that the pursuit of ambition without conscience comes at a cost no empire, wealth, or human mind can fully comprehend. As the 19th century dawned, Puerto Rico's hunger remained insatiable, indifferent to the political upheavals sweeping across South America. Independence movements challenged colonial rule, but the miners' suffering continued unbroken. Tunnels stretched deeper than ever, reaching shafts untouched for generations, their air thin and toxic, their floors unstable, their ceilings ready to collapse at any moment. Miners faced a new level of danger. As industrial demand for silver intensified, collapses claimed entire crews, respiratory illnesses multiplied, and mercury poisoning left bodies permanently weakened. Families above continued to mourn in silence, powerless against the mountain's relentless appetite. Yet miners pressed onward, driven by hope, necessity, or coercion, their lives measured in hours spent under the crushing weight of rock. Rumors and legends among laborers told of the mountain as a sentient force, aware of human greed and indifferent to pain. Even those with knowledge and experience could not escape its grasp. The mountain demanded obedience, endurance, and relentless labor. Above ground, cities glittered with silver and celebrated wealth, blind to the human toll beneath their feet. Every coin, every bar of silver that flowed to Europe or funded empires carried the invisible cost of lives lost, families broken, and generations scarred. Despite suffering that defied comprehension, rituals and whispered prayers persisted underground, miners leaving small offerings of food, coins, or tokens in the hope that the mountain would spare them. The divide between opulence above and carnage below became ever starker, a cruel paradox of human civilization. Puerto Rico had become more than a mountain or a resource. It had evolved into a predator, patient, eternal, feeding on ambition, desperation, and the fragile illusion of human control. Each day added to its legacy, a record of sacrifice measured not in numbers, but in the hollowed eyes, trembling hands, and broken bodies of those who dared descend into its depths. And yet, for all its horror, the mountain's power persisted, silent, unseen, and unyielding, reminding every laborer and every empire above that wealth extracted from the earth carries a price that humanity is rarely willing to acknowledge. Into the mid-1800s, the appetite of Puerto Rico remained as relentless as ever. Indifferent to revolutions, political change, or human suffering, miners continued to descend daily into tunnels carved decades earlier, now expanded deeper into the mountain, where air was thinner, dust heavier, and ceilings increasingly unstable. The mountain claimed the unskilled, the unlucky, and sometimes even the most experienced. Entire crews vanished in a single collapse, swallowed without a trace, their screams echoing only in the memory of survivors. Mercury contamination continued to poison generations, leaving bodies deformed, minds fatigued, and lungs destroyed. Families above struggled to survive in a city built on the sacrifice of others, mourning loved ones whose lives were never recorded in any ledger. Even as the Spanish Empire waned and Bolivia moved toward independence, labor systems persisted, ensuring that Puerto Rico continued to exact its toll. Miners developed rituals, whispered prayers, and small offerings, believing these acts could appease the mountain, though none could fully protect them. The mountain's veins were deep, twisting like a living organism, demanding strength, endurance, and unrelenting patience. Above ground, cities prospered on the silver that funded trade, armies, and infrastructure, unaware or indifferent to the lives spent, broken, and lost below. Every ounce of silver extracted symbolized not prosperity alone, but a human cost measured in suffering, disease, and death. Miners spoke of the mountain as a sentient predator, patient and calculating, feeding on ambition, desperation, and fear. Its hunger was eternal, its demands insatiable, and its presence both physical and psychological, shaping the lives of families above and laborers below alike. In whispered songs and secret prayers, miners attempted to negotiate with the mountain, offering tokens of survival and endurance, yet the predator remained indifferent. Cerro Rico had become more than a mountain. It had become a monument to human greed, ambition, and resilience. Every corridor, every shaft, every pile of silver carried with it the weight of lives consumed, a grim reminder that for all its beauty and wealth, the mountain demanded payment in blood, sweat, and irretrievable loss. By the late 1800s, Cerro Rico's toll had become impossible to ignore. Thousands of miners perished every year, and yet the silver continued to flow relentlessly to global markets. Entire families had been consumed by the mountain, with fathers, sons, and daughters forced into labor under conditions that few could endure. Collapses remained frequent, often trapping men for days or leaving them buried forever. Mercury poisoning crippled generations, leaving survivors scarred, blind, and coughing blood for the rest of their lives. Despite the horrors, miners continued to descend, driven by poverty, coercion, or the faint hope of survival. The city above, glittering with opulence, celebrated festivals, built churches, and traded wealth that had been purchased with human suffering hidden beneath the surface. Legends grew of miners who entered together and emerged alone, their eyes hollow, their voices muted, haunted by the ghosts of friends and companions claimed by the rock. Rituals and offerings persisted, small acts of desperation intended to placate the seemingly sentient mountain, yet even the most careful efforts could not guarantee life. Each ton of silver carried the invisible weight of countless deaths, an account measured not in numbers, but in the hollowed eyes and trembling hands of those who survived. Cerro Rico had become both a source of immense wealth and a predator, feeding on human ambition, desperation, and fear. Its hunger was patient, silent, and eternal, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires above. As miners continued their perilous work, each step deeper into the mountain became a negotiation with death, and every exit a miracle of endurance. The mountain's shadow loomed over Potosi, a constant reminder that every act of extraction exacted a price that humanity could not fully comprehend. Even as the 19th century progressed and the world around the mountain changed, Cerro Rico remained the same, relentless, insatiable, and unforgiving. Wealth, ambition, and survival intertwined in its tunnels, leaving a legacy of suffering that would echo through generations. Every ounce of silver carried with it the story of a life consumed, a reminder that some mountains do not give up their treasures freely. They demand a toll that only the living can witness, and the dead pay in silence. As the 20th century approached, Cerro Rico's legacy of human suffering remained embedded in every shaft, tunnel, and crevice. Though industrial techniques allowed miners to descend further and extract silver more efficiently, the mountain's hunger was unchanged. Collapses continued, claiming the unskilled, the exhausted, and sometimes even the most experienced. Mercury contamination lingered, leaving bodies deformed, lungs damaged, and minds fatigued by decades of exposure to darkness and poison. Generations of families were bound to the mountain's insatiable appetite. Sons replaced fathers, brothers replaced uncles, and children entered tunnels too young to understand the danger they faced. Above ground, Potosi's streets remained vibrant, its wealth displayed in opulent houses, churches, and marketplaces, yet few noticed or acknowledged the invisible toll beneath their feet. Miners spoke of Cerro Rico in hushed tones, as though naming it aloud might summon its wrath. Legends told of those who entered together but emerged alone, hollow-eyed, mute with terror and fatigue. Rituals persisted, offerings of coins, food, and prayers left in narrow recesses to appease the mountain that had claimed so many lives. Each ounce of silver taken above carried the weight of countless deaths, a grim accounting of human endurance and suffering. Even with modern oversight, the mountain remained dangerous, a reminder that wealth extracted from the earth comes at a cost that can never truly be repaid. Cerro Rico had become a predator, silent yet omnipresent, feeding on human ambition and desperation across centuries. Its story was not only one of greed, but also of resilience. Men continued to enter its depths despite knowing the risks. Families endured in the shadow of loss, and legends persisted of survival against all odds. The mountain demanded sacrifice, endurance, and fearlessness, and it left an indelible mark on all who encountered it. Cerro Rico was more than a geological formation. It had become a living testament to human ambition, suffering, and the relentless pursuit of wealth. A reminder that some secrets of the earth are written in blood, and some mountains demand payment in lives rather than silver. Today, Cerro Rico still stands, a towering reminder of centuries of human ambition, greed, and suffering. Its slopes bear scars from the countless tunnels carved by generations of miners, and the air within its veins remains thick with the echoes of the past. Even now, modern miners descend with caution, aware that the mountain's instability could claim life at any moment. Mercury contamination lingers in the soil, the rock, and the water, a silent testament to the toll exacted over hundreds of years. The history of Cerro Rico is etched into every corridor, every shaft, and every pile of discarded rock, a record of 8 million men, women, and children who perished for silver that enriched empires far beyond Bolivia. Above ground, Potosi continues to display remnants of its wealth. Grand churches, elaborate facades, and bustling marketplaces, all built on the labor and suffering of those lost within the mountain. Miners and locals speak of the mountain as though it is alive, patient, calculating, and insatiable. Legends persist that it still hungers, that it watches the city above, and that its tunnels continue to claim lives for the faintest mistakes. The mountain has become both a source of wealth and a symbol of caution, a reminder that some treasures come at a cost, measured not in coins but in human lives. Its story transcends generations, teaching that ambition and desire can exact a terrible toll when unchecked. Cerro Rico devoured men, women, and children alike, leaving a legacy intertwined with silver, grief, and enduring cautionary lessons. The ghosts of miners past linger in shadowed corridors, whispering warnings to those who dare enter. And though the world may admire the mountain's riches from afar, the truth remains hidden beneath its surface. Wealth extracted from the earth is never free. Every step into its depths is a negotiation with mortality, and every ounce of silver carried above is a reminder of the mountain's patient, unyielding appetite. Cerro Rico, the mountain that devoured millions, stands today as a testament to human endurance, the consequences of greed, and the eternal cost of ambition when confronted by forces that demand more than the living can give. It is a monument of history written in stone, blood, and silence, warning that some mountains take far more than they give, and that secrets buried deep within the earth often remain untold, yet never forgotten.